Chapter 5 is out, and before we fully plunge back into the between chapter Dark Ages, I just want to take a bit of time to go over my predictions from the last video and judge just how good they were. Spoiler alert, they were pretty damn bad. But hey, that's kinda funny. Plus I had one or two I'm slightly proud of. And at the end of the video I'm also going to cover my general thoughts over the chapter. Also, I'll be showing the predictions from the last video so you don't have to have watched it before this one. Thanks for watching, and let's go. And in the trailer we see Flower Pot and flower themed enemies, as well as these trash guys, and Goku Nubert. While the flowers and stuff seem to mostly point towards it being a Flower King Dark World, these trash guys seem to point to this alley that's somewhat nearby. Yeah, I forgot the trash guys are from chapter 2. Sorry. Yeah, so it turns out that the Matsuri Festival promo art from a little while ago might not just be for fun. Perhaps the festival in Hometown is a little Japanesey, but at the very least we know that the Dark World really seems to be like that. As for this one, no Matsuri Festival. It was just a small-scale American State Fair style festival. Though I guess there were octopus balls, so that kinda fits the theme. And also has horrifying implications, but you know. Off some high confidence ones, like 70% certainty plus. Maybe these aren't the most interesting ones, but it's still stuff that's unconfirmed. So let's go. First off, I think Asgore will be the primary antagonistic figure of Chapter 5, serving as the final boss, based on this panel named Boss 3. But it is still kind of interesting, because this will be the first time we've seen a pure Lightner be the boss. Sure, the Knight, who's probably a Lightner, was the boss for Chapter 4, but that's a bit different. Well, it was a twist, and yeah, I think the reason I was so confident on this one was because Asgore himself was in the image, but there was also a flower in the image, and that ended up being the boss. So yeah, that's fair. I was a bit disappointed about the lack of a new Asgore battle theme though, to be honest. Secondly, I think Noelle will end up in the Dark World again. It just makes too much sense. Everybody is going to the festival, there's the hinted return of the Weird Route, and the Inferno of Jealousy that is described in Gerson's 5th book, which is likely primarily talking about Asgore. But it could also hint towards jealousy from Berdly towards Noelle, or maybe even from Noelle towards Chris in the Weird Route, where Chris is the one bringing Noelle to the festival. I also think there's a very good chance that Sans will show up a decent amount in the festival part at least, as after all, if there's somebody that Asgore is jealous of, it would be him. I kinda doubt that he'll actually go into the Dark World, so I'm not gonna make any predictions there, but I guess that would be neat, we haven't seen much of him. Nope, nope, nope. No Noelle in the Dark World, and the Weird Route is 20 minutes long. So I was very far off on this, and the Weird Route being so short definitely threw off a lot of my other predictions. However, it was pretty much correct that Chris definitely seems jealous of Noelle throughout the chapter, and we get a pretty clear confirmation that they are interested in Susie, so I do think I was right about that part at least. I think this chapter will keep the same format as the others, even more closely than Chapter 3 did, bringing back a separate hidden boss, rather than the pseudo-hidden bosses like the Knight or Eram. But yeah, so far Toby's pretty much directly said that this will be the final, chill, Chapter 1 or 2 style adventure. But I definitely also think that this is partially a meta thing about Rowsley's character, as he's going to be trying to keep it together like that the whole time. So I also fully expect it to fall apart at the end. And yeah, the secret boss is back, and they're much closer to Chapter 1 and 2 style. And the battle is a full party battle, so I was wrong about that part, but I still do think we're getting a Rowsley solo secret boss eventually. Admittedly, now that all the dark shards are found, that might change how things work a little bit, but I still would be pretty surprised that we never ended up getting one. Speaking of Rowsley, I think one of the main focuses for this chapter will be him trying to go back to normalcy after Chapter 4, and especially after Susie gaining the knowledge of the end of the prophecy. I think this chapter will be a bit of a breaking point for him, culminating with his secret boss at the end of this. I think he'll have a really big character moment with the secret boss especially. And how his character handles everything is likely going to very heavily impact how these final 2 chapters play out, if he's able to adapt and grow, or if it breaks him. I personally lean towards the belief that things are probably going to go really wrong, and this will be an all hope is lost moment in the story, ending the second act and setting up the last 2 chapters as the big third act of the story. So there was no all hope is lost moment. This chapter actually has a pretty quiet ending, to be honest, and Rowsley isn't really struggling throughout it to try to keep it on normal, but he's more so constantly anxious over the future and arguing with Flowery, which is a fascinating way for this character, and it did end up being very Rowsley focused, so I was sort of right about that, but I got just about all the details wrong. And perhaps this is more of another 99% confidence theory, but I think that Azrael is alive. Even if he doesn't come home in Chapter 5, I don't think he's dead, nor I think that Rowsley is his dust. And you can slot in most crack theories here. No Papyrus Knight, Gaster Nuke, or anything of the sort. I also don't think we'll see Gaster at all in Chapter 5. Save him for Chapter 6 or 7. And that's just assuming that he ever actually comes to the forefront of Deltarune. Yeah, this is an easy prediction. Of course, technically, several of these theories are still not confirmed as we still haven't seen Azrael yet. But I mean, come on. And now time for just a couple iffy ones. Predictions, they're around 40% chance, tops. I think this chapter will be the climax of the Weird Route, but not the end. Yes, this is in contention with the image that most Weird Route predictions are based on, which, if you haven't seen it yet, it's basically this, and it's this image of a bunch of numbers, and it's theorized that their size and visibility are based on the importance of the Weird Route within the chapter. But you can't even see chapters 6 and 7, so people theorize that the Weird Route won't even come up then, and it'll end in chapter 5. But something that people also don't mention is that if you go for the pages for chapters 1 and 3, the text not applicable appears, versus chapter 2 where applicable appears in chapter 5, where the 5 numbers are. However, for chapters 6 and 7, you just see the sleeping dog, and it's named Room Dog Check. And increasing the number of chapters is always a sleeping dog. And yes, I checked chapter 666, and it was also a sleeping dog. It seems to be pointing towards chapter 6 and 7 not even existing, at least in the context of the Weird Route. So I'm not really sure what to think. So I'm just gonna guess that while the Weird Route will end at chapter 5, it won't be an ending per se. And instead the game will continue on, but the final ending will be recontextualized by the Weird Route, maybe with some slight changes. So the game ends up with pretty much just having one ending, but it means very different things depending on which route you took. Well, what do you know? While it is arguable if this is really a climax for the Weird Route, Chris and Noelle walking out into the lake is kind of huge, and it looks like the Weird Route will pick up in an apparent Chapter 7 Side B, which is crazy. Side B kind of implies that it takes place after the normal ending. So no idea how this is going to work out to just being one ending. I think that line from the description is probably not nearly as important as we've been thinking. For my second prediction, I think a semi-important character who we haven't seen yet will make an appearance in the Chapter 5 Light World. Personally, I'm leaning towards either Papyrus or Azrael making a visit. Similar to how we finally got to meet Carol in Chapter 4, it doesn't seem like Deltarune wants to hold everything for Chapter 7, thankfully. Nope, unless you count Mew Mew. Third, I think the Inferno of Jealousy is literally going to be the sun shown in the trailer. We see the sun in the new Dark World, and I've seen this theory mentioned a couple times online after the trailer dropped. And yeah, I think it makes sense, plus it's pretty weird to see the sun in a Dark World. I mean, it's clearly got dark in the name, so I think this explains its presence. Susie points out the sun and how weird it is once, and I feared that it would come up again, but it didn't. So yeah, I kinda wish it was explained, as the sun in the Dark World is very interesting, but there is also the possible explanation that it was actually the lamps above it, which helps explain the different colors as well. As for why they go down over the time, yeah, I don't really have an explanation for that. I suppose that just because this Dark World is a garden and has all these flowers and stuff, the sun, which is ridiculously important for flowers, would show up there, so that's a good enough explanation, oh well. And yeah, there was no physical Inferno at Jealousy. The closest thing was Ralsei making some fire magic, which I guess could be what it's talking about, but I really don't think it is, just because that wasn't really an act performed out of jealousy from Ralsei. I think the Inferno stuff is basically just flowery language from Gerson. Yeah, I think Carol will also show up in the Dark World, with there being a good chance that Asgore got his katana from her. So she'll probably not only know of this Dark World that he made with the katana, but I bet she'll show up to either shut down his little flower kingdom, or she'll be the one who instructed him to make it in the first place, and she'll be showing up to do something there. Nope, not at all. And now, perhaps the most interesting predictions. These are a big risk, but at the same time, they aren't based on nothing. These are absolute maximum 20% chance of happening, probably much lower. So starting off with a bang, I'm predicting that the Knight's identity will be revealed by the end of Chapter 5. Despite the chapter apparently being the last more laid back one, I think we're going to get some moments right at the end that set up those last two mysterious chapters. And with the huge focus that the Knight got in Chapter 4, I think that it makes sense to move on to a new phase of the story with this chapter, and revealing who the Knight actually is for certain could start to shift the focus onto the conspiracy around them and Carol and their endgame. And yeah, I'm really assuming that Carol's not the Knight, but I don't know, maybe she is. There really isn't much to hint towards Chapter 5 being the exact time that we will learn their identity, and well, there's not even much to hint that this Knight will show up in Chapter 5. So that's why I put it in unlikely, but I'm mostly just guessing this because I think it'd be a good spot in the flow of the story for the reveal, in my opinion. Seems natural. Nope, Knight barely shows up. My next prediction is that the prophecy will end with the end of Chapter 5, and will reach the world's end. This is partially based on something that Gerson says. And just summarizing the quote, he says, "There was only one more chapter, and after that it all stopped. That next book, it never did get written. The story became so grand and overwhelming that it swallowed up the author himself. The ones who could write the next, the youth, the pen was lying there for them to pick it up, to make the next page. They never did." So while this partially seems to be a reference to his actual book and the fact that his son never continued on and finished his story, it also supports the idea that the true ending hasn't been written yet in the prophecy. And this kind of makes sense from a meta perspective as well, as we've been given so few details on those final two chapters, other than the fact that Chapter 6 has apparently been easier to develop. It leads me to think that there is a very good chance there'll be a big rug pull. And while Chapter 6 may partially be covered by the prophecy, Chapter 7 is where all bets are off, and the heroes are really going to be writing their own story from then on out. So honestly, this prediction was kinda confused to begin with. I should have spent some more time on it, but I do think that it makes sense for Chapter 6 to reach World's End. I think I just expected the end of Chapter 5 to be a bigger deal than it ended up being. Is this pretty much the first chapter to not have a pretty big cliffhanger or reveal to end on? So yeah, I'm tentatively saving this prediction and applying it towards Chapter 6. It's not concrete, and yeah, I'm sure I'll be wrong, but you know. But I think Flowey might have some sort of importance in Chapter 5. I mean, I wasn't really for this theory, but look at those faces in the trailer. Plus, Toby's jump scare looks just like Flowey, and honestly, I'm beginning to question more and more if Friend and Flowey have more in common than I thought. I mean, Flowey calls himself your best friend, they both have that smile, and even if they aren't literally one and the same, the parallels are there. So I wonder if we'll see a bit of that explored there in the Chapter 5 weird route. Well, we got Flowery, who is definitely not Flowey, but I mean, come on, Flowery? That's a hilarious character name to be real. Straight out of a Human Your Genocide shitpost. As for his actual relations with Flowey, not really. And one last one, Friend. I think it will be inside Chapter 5. I'm not totally convinced that it'll be the secret boss that Rousey fights. It certainly could be. But I think that Friend will mostly be tied to the weird route, and that's where you'll see him. Well, the weird route just never entered the Dark World. So while Friend does show up in one spooky little area of Chapter 5, this was not the chapter at all. And yeah, of course there's the question of if they'll ever be of real importance. And I do think the fact that they showed up again means that they will probably play some role, but never maybe a super prominent one. I don't know. Friend is confusing. Finally, these are ridiculously huge claims, but I'm gonna make a couple of them. They will likely sound really dumb in 2 weeks, but if they're right, I'll get a gloat about how I somehow got it right. But starting out, I'm just gonna straight up throw my weight behind Groot's theory. If you haven't heard of that, then you should go watch the video because it's really good. And honestly, this isn't even really me saying that the majority of ideas in the theory are stupid or unlikely, but more so that there's a lot of parts to that theory and it would be kinda crazy if they were all right. But with this ridiculously huge claim that's probably wrong, I'm gonna say that it'll be around 95% right. The festival is the Dark World, the weird route consists of going around killing everyone in the Dark World, and then going into the bunker and fighting Friend. It's a lot of things that have quite a bit of evidence, but it's more so about the way that it all stitches it together. Still, I'm predicting Root's theory. Let's see if it's right. This one kinda hurt, as I really like the idea of a festival Dark World. But hey, it was the curry on the moon.png prediction. But also, if this happened, then actually what the hell is a sword route then? I guess that's Chapter 7 Part 2 territory. Finally, there's a good chance that we won't get an answer to this question in Chapter 5. But basically, I think that Chris did something in the past that they were repressing. It's a great answer to a lot of the questions that we have about them. Why are people scared of them at school? Why is Noelle so wary of them? What do they have that night? And what's going on with the tree and the eggs in the Chapter 4 art therapy room? I think this will end up being one of the most important parts of the game and really shine a new light on Chris as a character. I suppose this is pretty vague for a crazy claim, so I guess it's more so that I just think it's a little early to be guessing this, because I think it's going to be such a late reveal. And also, I don't think it's going to be some reveal that Chris was secretly evil, but more so that there's just more to them that we don't know about yet as the player. I talked about this a bit in a previous video. Yeah, no answer to this yet. There is our egg room where it talks about the fact that the egg room is recursive in both directions, which has interesting implications, possibly meta ones, but it's nothing related to Chris's past. And finally, these aren't predictions, but they're more of an informal wish list. Stuff I personally want in the game, and mostly just stuff I think would be fun to have. First off, more Birdly. He's fun and I miss him. So Birdly got like 3 new lines. And I'd also really like if there's a festival going on in Castletown too. Maybe Lancer gets everyone to put it on so Rousey can go to the festival with Chris and Susie. Plus, most importantly, it would give us more Queen content. While there isn't a Dark World festival, there is some fun stuff to do here, and it's mostly with Queen, so I'm pretty happy with that. I also really want Noelle back in the Dark World, and I would love for more characters, including her, to become aware of their existence. As the reveals of secrets like that to other characters are always some of my favorite moments in any series or story. Plus, I think that new interesting things can be done with Noelle's character after a reveal like that. This is the whole setup for the next chapter, so at least I'll probably eventually get what I'm hoping for, even though it doesn't seem to be setting up something all that positive. Finally, if Chapter 5 introduces a new Darkner antagonist similar to King, Queen, or Tenna, I really hope that there's something a bit more fresh than Tenna. Don't get me wrong, I like the guy, but he felt very standard as a Toby Fox character, pretty similar to Papyrus and especially Metaton, so something completely new would be neat to see explored. Especially given that this will likely be the last chance for a lighthearted antagonist like this in Deltarune. Though again, it'll probably just end up being Asgore, but maybe he gets a cool sidekick or something. In many ways, Flowery is another Tenna. And presentation wise, Yeah, he's okay. The voice lines sound funny, and the anime intro was a jump scare. I didn't find him particularly funny, but as a character and a foil to Rouse and Suzy, he's pretty great, so eh. Okay, those are my predictions. Now it's time for a little review. This is all my subjective opinions, and I'd love to have some discussion about it in the comments. And plus, just a quick reminder, be sure to subscribe for future videos, including a video essay I'm currently working on over the new chapter. But let's start by talking a bit about gameplay. The gameplay for this chapter isn't perfect, but I did have a lot of fun with it. The platformer mechanic is awesome. It's such a cool moment whenever the perspective shifts and you get to realize that yes, they are doing this. And though it's generally very easy, there are a few cool ideas, and it is just neat in a Deltarune game to be actively attacking the attacker during the battle phase. Plus, it keeps up one of my favorite parts of Undertale and Deltarune's design, which is that characters react in responsive and creative ways to the mechanics of the game. This really peaked in Chapter 3 with the Zelda game section, where Deltarune practically turns into a playable Let's Play, but moments like Aqua messing up Seth's attacks and Flowery sparing all your recruits are great. My only real complaint with the platformers is that it just really feels like a stage 1 of the style of gameplay. Like in just about any other game, this would have been introduced back in Chapter 1, and developed since then, so it does feel a bit weird to just now get to it over halfway through the game. So it does feel a bit underdeveloped. Especially the acts, which pretty much all boil down to press act to proceed in the platforming section or press act to stun an enemy. It's especially a bit damning that the final platforming section literally automakes these acts for you if you mess up a few times. It feels like a mechanic that could have added more puzzle solving or decision making to the platformer mode, but it instead just ended up as a superfluous addition. As for the classic Deltarune combat, the bosses continue to be fantastic. Flowery is one of the best final bosses yet in terms of fun and difficulty, and the secret boss is also a fun challenge. And I also think the Flower humans largely have very engaging fights, with the investigation battle especially standing out in my opinion is a very smart way to reward exploration of the area and encourage a bit of puzzling during the acts. And you also have the battle itself, which is pretty solid. However, the original enemies are just more forgettable than ever in my opinion. They have generally nice designs, but combat with all of them just boils down to maybe 2 or 3 very short bullet hell sequences, and then pressing an act button, which raises their spare bar, and then sparing them. And at this point, the spare percentage is basically just a health bar with some pacifist sparkles. When you break it down, Undertale's act system was similar, but you usually had to make a choice based on the enemy in order to try to appease it, which required just a little bit of thinking, and was a contextual bit that really made most battles more interesting and feel more like you're actually trying to reason with the enemy and get on their good side, rather than just filling up a bar. So I do really miss that. Also, is it just me, or are these normal enemies weirdly bounced? While they have bullet patterns that are much harder to completely dodge than the average boss pattern is. But it ends up not really mattering since the fights are so short and you can probably heal at a save point within the next 4 seconds of beating any enemy. Like the bosses usually have more clearly telegraphed attacks that can be tricky to dodge but are also more learnable. While normal enemies, bullets often move so fast that it's hard to react to them and you only fight them like once or twice. Once again, I have never died to ordinary enemy, but it is often unsatisfying to have such a short and messy fight that didn't end up mattering at all since I could instantly heal for free afterwards. It is a bit disappointing because I honestly still remember just about every random fight in Undertale, and a lot of the different mechanics and funny jokes and stuff throughout them. And it's kind of unfortunate that Deltarune made these choices that make its battle system shine just a little bit less. Moving on to the Dark World, I like this one. It's expansive and does a lot with its theme, from the dark valley you start in to climbing up the mountain and then a huge castle at the top. And the sunset progressing is really cool visually and ties into the theme of just how temporary this Dark World is. The cafe shop is one of my favorite moments in the whole chapter as well. It's incredibly beautiful, especially that theme, which is easily my favorite at Chapter 5. Despite it being incredibly similar to the other shop themes, it just works really well. On to the writing and characters and stuff. I generally like the Flower humans, and the way they tie back to Undertale's fallen humans is a cool detail. While none of the characters are crazy deep, I like how they are all trying to emulate humans and aren't quite perfect in their emulation. I don't really have a problem with the chapter spending a sizable amount of time with a cast of characters who will likely be completely contained to this chapter, as once again it reinforces the theme that this is all temporary, which seems to have really important ties to Deltarune's overall themes, and the Fungang and Asgore also have pretty important interactions facilitated by the Flower humans, so I don't think it's right to say they are completely superfluous to the larger plot of Deltarune. However, I did find the overall lack of plot progression a little bit frustrating. This really was a chapter where the least happens concerning core plot points like the night and how the Dark Worlds work, nor are any ongoing mysteries revealed or even really expanded upon. Well, I'm not saying that I needed a whole gas explosion of whatever, even though I admittedly did predict a bunch of stuff would happen. It was kind of frustrating in moments whenever Asgore talks extremely vaguely of the incident, and it honestly puts a bit of a damper on all the character moments he has throughout the chapter because we just don't really know what happened that started this conflict for him. Perhaps there is a really good reason that we don't know, but in my opinion, especially in the moment of playing the chapter, I do wish that we got a little bit more to chew on. Like, on one hand, I largely understand why these choices were made, but they still did annoy me a little bit. And as the game is being released in a chapter format, I do think it is really important how the chapters are paced, even if this won't matter in the final release of the game. But ultimately, this isn't a huge complaint. As for Asgore himself, I really like what they did with his character. I was a bit worried after chapters 3 and 4 that he was just gonna be a complete idiot, but he's very sympathetic. I like how he's both this ridiculously kind person, and yet it's also completely understandable how his actions resulted in him and Trill getting divorced. I'll go more in depth with him in my video essay I'm working on, although I will mostly focus on Chris in it. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the festival. This is probably the highlight of the chapter for me. Though the Light World sections have been fantastic chapter 3 onwards, so this wasn't too big of a surprise. Perhaps it was a bit of a problem that chapters 5's start kind of eclipses the rest of the chapter, but that's also more so in retrospect. Oh yeah, and the Sans drawing moment made me sit there for like a minute in silence. It's just clear confirmation that Sans in Undertale is in some way the same one as the Sans in Deltarune. It is worth noting that depending on the route and the choices you made, the specific 3 people who are drawn on the card by Susie will change. But importantly, it is always 3 people drawn on the card. Finally, it wouldn't be a new Toby Fox project without an extensive soundtrack. And I think Chapter 5 delivers again. I don't know what the overall consensus is for this chapter's soundtrack, but personally, while this isn't one of my absolute favorites, I think it's super consistent with some fantastic highlights. Garden of Hopes and Dreams is a fantastic remix of the original that really makes it super grand, and it's just a great moment in the chapter. I Guess I'm in Love is lovely. Rakuichi Buster is yet another great version of Rude Buster. Quiet Glade is great. I always appreciate the more somber, atmospheric tracks. Sunset of Seven Suns is incredible. Shop 3 is hauntingly beautiful and my favorite in the chapter. Cutie Mew Mew Magic is perfect for the fight, and it's very fun to have Hatsune Miku in a Deltarune soundtrack. And of course, Flower Man is great. A blend of a memorable new melody and classic Deltarune leitmotifs, and it continues a really cool trend of some songs having official lyrics. Hell, I wouldn't be totally against having a singer in the actual game, though not having one does lend itself well to fan covers being made, which is kinda cool in its own right, but still, games like Persona had completely sold me on having lyrics and battle music, so I hope we get it at least once. Maybe Laura Shihara could sing a reprise of Don't Forget or something. That'd be cool. So overall, I like Chapter 5, but it wasn't one of my favorite chapters. I don't know if I have a definitive ranking yet, as I probably need at least one more replay of each chapter, but it is in the lower half for me. But that's all for this video. Once again, I'm open to discussion in the comments, and also comment on if you had any predictions that were correct or horribly wrong. I'm curious to see just how bad mine were compared to the average. Be sure to subscribe for new videos, and check out this video I made covering a bunch of cool Deltarune theories. Or maybe this one, where I analyze all the character arcs up to Chapter 4. Thanks for watching. Bye.